Ever since launch, Helldivers 2 has always had a balancing problem. Ever since the beginning, a lot of controversial decisions. Ever since I would say the start of the railgun nerf is when really the discussion of Helldivers balancing really came into question. There's a lot of suggestions on how we should balance the game, and I just want to give my thoughts on how I would personally balance the game. Now, first and foremost, I think the idea of over buffing things is a dumb concept. The whole idea, you see it a lot being floated around. Oh, if this gun's strong, instead of making it weaker, make every gun strong. That doesn't work. That never will work. Because what will happen is you buff every single gun. What happens when you release another gun that's overpowered? What do you do then? Do you nerf it down? People are going to complain that you're going to nerf it. Do you buff every gun up? Then people are going to complain the game is getting too easy. And even if you do buff all the guns up, then what happens when next patch, when you release another gun that's kind of broken? What happens then? And you could make the argument saying, oh, just don't release a gun that's broken. Well, that's easier said than done. That's way easier said than done because you have to make a new gun at the similar power level as everything else. And then another argument to that would be, well, make the guns weaker, intentionally make them weaker and buff them up as needed. Well, if you do that, then people are going to complain that the gun is too weak and they just bought it and the gun's useless and they have to wait 2 or 3 months for it to be on par. And even then, you still run the risk of it being OP. So it's a double-edged sword. And right now, there's two portions of the Helldivers community. One that likes a chill and relaxed experience and likes playing the game with semi-difficulty. And then you have the other side of it, which craves harder challenges and wants to play the game on the max difficulty and the max settings. And that's where you kind of run, that's where the discrepancy lies, really. You see, one portion of the community would be 100% okay with every gun being kind of overpowered and just having fun because it's a PvE game. While the other portion would hate that because if they did do that, then the harder difficulties would become easier, and they don't want the harder difficulties to become easier. So the idea of buffing every single gun is just not a realistic thing. There has to be some sort of balance. There has to be a line where you cannot cross, and if a gun goes above that line, it needs to come back down, and if a gun goes below that line, it needs to come back up. That's where you want it is. Now, if you want to argument the line for Helldivers is a little bit skewed, where the balancing team is currently at, maybe you got to raise that bar a little bit, making guns a little bit stronger. That's fine. That's fine. But at the end of the day, that won't solve anything. That's a temporary solution to a long-term problem. What you really need to do is find a way how you balance this game properly, where the hardcore players are still enjoying the game because it's hard, and the players that play on difficulty 6, difficulty 7 could still enjoy the game and still feel like their guns have impact and they're still having fun. Now, there's been a lot of suggestions I've seen to this, but here's my thoughts on what we should actually do. So I think that every single gun, every single one needs some sort of minor buff. Some sort of minor things. Maybe increase the stats a little bit. Like for the flamethrower, make it a little bit more effective on armor. Not how it used to be, but a little bit more effective against armor. Nothing crazy. Maybe buff the railgun a little bit, a little damage increase. Not by a lot. Buff some assault rifles. Buff some stuff. Every gun gets a little bit stronger. Not a ton. Not crazily, but a little tiny bit stronger. And then from that point on, you don't touch the guns. You don't touch. If a new gun comes out, you balance it accordingly to get to a power level where you're happy with. But at the end of the day, how you have to balance this game, in my opinion, is not by looking at the guns. Stray away from them. Stay away from them. What you have to do is look at the difficulties. So right now, how difficulties are, is that difficulties are 1 through 10. At the lowest level, you have enemies that have low spawn rates and low damage, and it'll be hard for you to die. I think you got to take a look at that. I think what we really have to do is to balance it out, is make difficulties based upon enemy health. Create sections of difficulty, right? You have enemies that are easier to kill on easier difficulties and harder to kill on harder difficulties, but leaving the guns the exact same. What that'll do is that for all the people that complain that, oh, railguns can't two-shot anymore, right? All the people that complain about that. Well, if you play on difficulty 6 and difficulty 7, guess what? Railguns are going to be able to two-shot. And I think you take that aspect and you expand upon it. You make it so instead of like difficulties, like 1 through 10, it just scales up and up and up. You make sections, right? You go like 1 through 4, enemies are going to have this much health and do this much damage. And on the 4th difficulty, they're going to have low health, but they're going to have high spawn rates. And then you have it 5 through 8, where enemies have a medium health, and at the 5th level, they have like medium spawn rates or decent spawn rates. And then at the 8th level, they have extremely high spawn rates, but they're still medium health, which means railguns at 5 through 8 will be able to two-shot. And everybody who likes the two-shot railgun will be happy because they could just play 5 through 8. And if they like low spawn rates and lower spawn enemies, they could play at 5 while still being at the railgun to two-shot. And if they like higher spawn rates and more difficult stuff, they could play at 8 while the railgun's still 2 shots. And for the hardcore players, that's 9 through 10. 9 through 10 easy, where enemies will have higher health, higher spawn rates, and it'll still be a huge challenge. And if you bring the railgun into that aspect, 9 through 10, it won't be able to 2-shot anymore. It'll still be a viable gun, but it will not be able to 2-shot anymore. That way that the players who enjoy the game casually and wants the guns to be buffed and feel impactful have that section where the guns will feel impactful. The guns will feel better. The guns will be great. And then you have the hardcore players that like the game to be hard and challenging. And it's going to be the exact same for them. Maybe the guns will be a little tiny bit stronger, but they won't really complain too much about that. At the end of the day, both sides are happy, in my opinion. Now, obviously, there's some flaws, to bring it out right away. This isn't like a perfect system. It's probably going to have to be tweaked and messed with a little bit. But I think this is the real solution to Helldivers. And I think that if this was implemented, people would be happy with the balancing. I don't think anybody would complain having their guns being really strong and having a mode where enemies are spawning a lot. There's a lot of enemies. There's tons of enemies you're constantly getting shot at. And enemies are doing damage, but your guns are still impactful and you feel like your guns are so strong and you're having fun. And then if you really want a really big challenge, you can go to the harder difficulties where your guns are a little bit less effective. Enemies are going to spawn just to try it out and just to have fun. And I really think the options is what I'm really trying to go for. Because instead of having this is how the game is, this is how balancing is, now you have options where it's like, if you want to just play mow down everybody, you play in the easier difficulties. If you want like the game to be balanced with a lot of enemies, you play in the medium difficulties. And if you want a brutal experience, you play in the harder ones. And I really think this is the big solution to Helldivers balancing. But that's just my opinion. Let me know if you like it, disagree with it, and thank you for listening to my rant.